various aspects of Jewish life and thought. They were conceived to be both informative and motivational and to appeal to the broad membership. Ideally, these lectures should serve as an introduction to Jewish learning, drawing our membership to more intensive commitment to a regular program of study. And now, may I present our chairman of the evening, Mr. Bernard Green.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Miller, Dr. Grayzel, ladies and gentlemen. It is my very pleasant privilege to present to you tonight an outstanding Jewish scholar and historian. Dr. Grayzel is probably the foremost Jewish historian in this country. He is the author of such books as A History of the Jews, The Church and the Jews in the 13th Century, and a recently published paperback entitled A History of the Contemporary Jew. Dr. Grayzel is editor of the Jewish Publication Society of America, an organization known to many of you, but perhaps not known to enough of you. He is a graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America and received his doctorate in philosophy from Dropsy College. He was president of the Jewish Book Council of America and is recording secretary presently of the Jewish Historical Society of America. For 20 years, Dr. Grayzel taught history at Gratz College. In 1957, he was the recipient of the Frank L. Weil Award given by the National Jewish Welfare Board for distinguished contribution to the development of American culture. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure and a privilege indeed to present to you the speaker of the evening, Dr. Solomon Grayzel.
Mr. Chairman, my friends, I would have let the one remark of our chairman go by without comment, except that I know that whatever I say is being taped and left for the record. And if it's going to be left for the record, then some future historian is going to hear the chairman announce that I am the foremost historian of this age, and I don't contradict him, there will be a lot of comment. That comment may not come for 100 or 200 or 500 years, but I daren't take a chance. So I want to assure my fellow Jews who are interested in the writing of Jewish history that I do not consider myself the foremost Jewish historian, nor should you. However, there is no subject that is so close to my heart, of course, and no subject that I think ought to be of greater interest to the Jews of the present day. I am not supposed to be talking about history, and yet history, as you know, is a flux, a flowing thing. And what is the present in an hour from now will be the past, and therefore belong to history. The future will in time belong to history. So that what I am here for is to make sure, substantially, that is my purpose, to make sure that we continue to have a history. In other words, that we continue to live on in the best possible sense of that term. You will see how that fits into what I have to say. But officially, I'm here to talk on the subject of books, the Bible, and modern man. Now, each one of these is enough for an entire series lasting for a year or more. But it is proper that these three subjects be brought in close contact with one another, especially on this occasion. In the first place, we just completed or concluded Jewish Book Month. There's a justification, therefore, for talking about books. We have an audience, or I have an audience of modern men and women. So there's modern man, which justifies my subject. Thirdly, while I am very much interested in books, this being my livelihood, at this moment, for the past few years and for some years to come, if God grants me life and strength, I am primarily interested in the Bible, and you will see why in a little while. What I'm going to talk about in connection with books is not in the nature of literary criticism. I'm not going to discuss why a book is good or why another one is not so good. I should rather devote my time to a discussion about books from a sociological nature. Not literary criticism, but social criticism. And I should like to point out to you from the very outset that reading, that books are really tools, not only things that you absorb, but things that you utilize or can utilize in order to attain certain goals. This excludes a certain type of book. For example, it excludes the reading of detective stories. Now, I like to read detective stories. I suppose many of you do. But that's a tool of a different kind. That's not what I mean by using literature as a tool. What I mean more directly is to use literature in order to answer certain questions which come to mind, or even if they don't come to mind, that are subconsciously within us, that we ask ourselves whether we realize it or not. Literature, for example, primarily asks the question, what am I like? What am I like? Or for a group, what are we like? You see, literature is a looking glass. And every writer is, in a sense, a person who holds that looking glass up to his generation and says to that generation, now look in here and see what you look like. If he's a good craftsman, if he's an able person, he's going to portray a true picture of the reader and the reader's milieu, the reader's surroundings. If he doesn't portray a true picture that the reader can recognize himself when he looks into it, he's not a good craftsman. And so, if I can make this a little clearer, let me take you back, using some history anyway, to literature more or less of our immediate past, so that you can recognize what I mean. Talking about fiction now, exclusively. About a century ago, Dickens lived and wrote. Now you pick up a book written by Dickens, and you see that what he was writing about was a situation in which the middle class was rising, and all the problems which that rise of the middle class produced, how it affected the upper class, how the upper class refused to accept, to recognize the middle class, how it affected the lower classes, out of which the middle class was rising, and all the struggles and all the pains that were connected with that social economic series of events. A generation or so later, around the turn of the century, or a little before, there was Henry James, who also wrote about the middle class. But there it was, the middle class already triumphant. And when you read his books, his stories, you see that here were people of the middle class who had risen, who already were disputing quite obviously and successfully the position which the upper classes had held. And there was a conflict between the middle class that had risen and the upper class that refused to relinquish its position in society, and yet more or less was frequently compelled to. Later, practically in our own time, certainly in mine, in the 1930s, you had a situation in which the middle class was already on the downgrade. On the downgrade. It had won its place, it had asserted itself, but now other classes were rising. It had brought problems into life, problems which it obviously was unable to solve, even as the upper classes had been unable to solve their problems a century earlier. And so you have Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, where you have an economic and social situation which was explosive, which in other countries did explode and uprooted the middle class and the upper class which had been in control at that time. So you see, each talent, each artist, each writer of his generation, if he is good enough, writes his books, and they serve as a mirror of what his people, his public, really were like. Now, in our own time, now in our very day, consider some of the books that you now read, and you will see how the situation is reflected in them. We are obviously living in an age where most people have lost their sense of direction. We really don't know what the future will bring. The middle class a century ago knew definitely what it wanted. We are not so sure that we know what we want. And any number of us, especially among the younger people, without goal, feel themselves somewhat superfluous in society. They aren't adjusted to society. Consequently, you have the beatnik element. Consequently, you have such writings, such stories, if you can call them that, as Fanny and Zoe by Salinger, where the young people are looking for an explanation. Why are they here? What are they here for? And what future is there for them? They are disturbed, uncertain, and they have to be talked into a certain degree of adjustment to an uncertain situation. That, I take it, is what Salinger meant to say. Sometimes difficult to find out just what he meant to say, but I take it that that's the purpose of his writing. Or Steinbeck's Winter of Our Discontent more or less gives you the very title is indicative of an uncertainty, of an ill-at-easeness about our situation. And as a result, I claim it, as a result of this sense of uncertainty, the loss of goal, the inability to set one's self definitely, permanently on the road of life, we have a rise in this generation of these novels that deal almost exclusively with sex. I don't think that we are any worse in those respects than our predecessors. It only seems so because this is a certainty, this element in life. And consequently, a gifted person who wants to attract the attention, the eye of the public, will devote himself to this aspect of life beyond which we mortals, people of flesh and blood, cannot go. The result is that you have these novels that devote themselves to this theme with a freedom and with a frequency which was not characteristic of the writers of a previous age. Now, I have tried so far to point out to you that if you want to know what you look like, I mean, if we want to know as a generation, as a Jewish group, if we want to know what we look like, we have to consider the literature that is written about us. What does the gifted author think we look like? And from that point of view, it would appear that Jewish writing, or writing in English on the Jewish theme, presupposes a certain type of person who is a descendant of Jews or who considers himself a Jew. The picture is not a flattering one. It is not anything that we can sit back about and pat ourselves on the back. But it is a picture that has to be considered. It isn't wise. It isn't wise for us to say, oh, this man is an anti-Semite, or that man hates himself and he hates Jews. It may or may not be so, but it isn't a wise attitude. We have to take these people seriously. We have to take the mirror that they hold up to us seriously. So let me give you an illustration. There's a year or two ago, a book appeared on the market in paper. It's in paperback. Anybody can read it, and I suppose lots of you did. This book by Philip Roth, a collection of short stories called Goodbye Columbus. Now, I grant you that when I read it, and I venture to say when any number of you read it, we writhed with pain. They're very painful stories to read. They show that this man, this gifted young man, and he is gifted, make no mistake about it. He knows how to write. He knows how to use the English language. He knows how to tell a story and how to portray character. He will be heard of or heard from. But he tells these stories about Jews that make you feel like crawling under the bed. Men and women without character, without morals, without ethics, without thought, without heart, without feeling. Perhaps he exaggerated. Probably did. An artist is entitled to exaggerate a bit. in order to bring out more boldly what he wants to say. But don't say, as lots of people said, this man is an anti-Semite. He doesn't know what he's talking about. That's too easy. That's much too simple an escape. This is what we look like to this author. And in effect, what he is saying to us is, look at yourselves. That's how you appear, or at least a substantial part of you. Another type also appears in a book which saw the light only a few months ago by another very gifted Jewish author. I was tempted to call him a young man, but I suppose somebody close to 40 is no longer entitled to that kind of adjective. Bernard Malamud, who writes superbly. He's a wonderful craftsman. And now this new book of his, which he calls A New Life, is the story of a Jew, of a Jewish young man. A Jewish young man who had wasted his opportunities, who had succumbed to all kinds of temptations while he was in New York. And he finally decided that this will never do. He was seeking to create a new life for himself. I don't want to tell you the story. But he goes off to the far west. He finds a position for himself as a teacher of English in a small college. And he makes the same mistakes that he would ordinarily make, that he probably made out in the East. He does the same foolish things, succumbs to the same temptations. Now, what's the purpose? What did Malamud try to tell us? He simply tried to indicate, in the first place, that to him, these people to whom their Jewishness means nothing. The hero's name is Levine. But that plays no part in it except to indicate that he comes from a Jewish background. But there's nothing Jewish about him. Absolutely nothing. Other than his name. And other than one other attitude. The inability to adjust himself to non-Jewish, to strange social conditions. He makes all the faux pas, all the blunders, the social blunders that you'd expect a man to make when he is outside of his customary environment, when he is ill at ease, not sufficiently adjusted. In other words, Malamud is saying to us two things. First of all, don't feel that you can run away from your background. It's not that easy. Secondly, that making a new life requires certain moral and ethical abilities. I'm tempted to say a certain type of moral and ethical courage, which some of these people who have run away from their Jewishness clearly do not possess. And that holds up a picture to another type of Jew of the present day. Malamud himself must have known this kind, because he too taught English in a Western university, though I don't know that any part of this is autobiographical. Now there are other such books. on the market, being written all the time. I recall one other not so popular these days and not so well written either. There's a woman by the name of Barbara Solomon. I think she comes from Boston, who wrote a book called The Beat of Life. The Beat of Life. I don't know whether she meant to imply that life has a rhythm, and this is the beat of life is just what she described it, or whether she meant to indicate that these people were beaten by life, that they were the beatniks of life in the sense of being defeated by it. In any event, it's the story of young people who intermarry and fail to find, or rather discover, that intermarriage requires more than merely that superficial kind of affection for one another which currently passes by the descriptive word love. Much more than that is indicated in order to overcome life, not to be beaten by it. But these are, the picture here is of young people, spoiled young people, unaware young people, people to whom their Jewishness is something extraneous, something imposed, who rebel against it and fail to see that a substantial part of it is part of them and cannot be simply brushed aside and denied without further ado. And her description of American Jewish youth is fortified by another type of approach. Perhaps we wouldn't call it literature. I'm inclined to do so, because anything well written on a printed page, to me, is literature. It doesn't have to be a romantic story to be of literary value. Now, I didn't read this book. It's sociological, and I haven't come to it. But its name indicates what the authors are about. They call the book Children of the Gilded Ghetto. Of the Gilded Ghetto. We, as a generation, my generation, the generation of many of you, have tried to provide for our children in such a way as to give them everything that we didn't have or we thought we missed. And the result is that we built a gilded cage for them. Still among Jews, still more or less a ghetto, but it's a gilded ghetto. And it doesn't work. A cage can be, there was an old ballad of that in my childhood, that a bird in a gilded cage or something of that kind. You can have a golden bars, and still they are bars. So you see, our current literature, if we are to take it seriously and use it as a tool, as it is fundamentally meant to be used, the tool is the mirror. And if we are wise, we're going to look upon this literature as, in a sense, a mirror, reflecting ourselves, our nature, our past, and to some extent, our future. There's another type of literature, another type of book, which we read, which is usable as a test tube, In other words, we say we have a problem, and fundamentally we ask ourselves the question, how did other people solve this problem? Or how did this problem originate? Maybe by looking at what happened before, we can get some idea of what we can do in the situation which faces us. And so we turn to historical fiction. Now, the popularity of historical fiction in the United States indicates not, I don't flatter myself, now talking as a historian, I don't flatter myself that suddenly there has been a spurt of interest in my subject. I don't think so. The interest is due to the realization, or to the subconscious realization perhaps, that the past has certain experiences from which we can profit. You take the current interest in the Civil War. True, it is timely. Here, exactly 100 years ago, a great war was fought on in this country, and we want to know what happened. But I think it is more than that. I think it is also due to the fact that our generation, like that generation of our predecessors 100 years ago, faces a social situation in which we have to adjust ourselves to a rising or a changing class structure. And therefore, we ask the question, why did they fight that war? Why did they get so excited about the Negro slavery? About the aristocrats of the South and the immigrant population of the North? Where was this contest, or what motivated it? And you have stories of war, stories of lack of adjustment, of suffering, of hardship imposed upon people, such as you find in McKinley Cantor's Spirit Lake or the Andersonville of a few years ago. There you have how brutal people can be to one another, how heartless, how unimaginative, how people can permit other people to die like flies. It's hard to imagine the agonizing cruelty of those prisoners of war camps that Cantor describes in Andersonville. Now, that happened only 100 years ago. It happened to us. I mean, to us, to our people, to our country, to the fathers or grandfathers of men and women with whom we are acquainted. And why get so excited about what's happening in Russia, or what can happen in a future war? That's the nature of the beast, of the human beast. And there too, I think Cantor, whether he knew it or not, is giving us a test tube. Test your nature. Test your nature. Are you capable of this kind of thing? Will you tolerate this kind of thing? And on in the Jewish side, you have similar things. We ask ourselves the question in this country fairly consciously, what is the basic cause for anti-Semitism? It's a simple problem. We discuss it time and again. And along came one of our most gifted craftsmen, Maurice Samuel, and about 2 years ago, he wrote a book which presumably offers an answer. His book called The Second Crucifixion, which alas and alack, all too few have read. It's an answer to this very problem. How did anti-Semitism come about and why? Is Christianity at fault? are the Christians at fault? And how can such a marvelous religion, and there is a great deal of to be said for Christianity. It is a good religion, properly observed, even as Judaism is a good religion, properly observed. How can such a religion with so much idealism, with so much hopefulness, which constantly talks about love as a basic element in society, how can such a religion have developed or permitted anti-Semitism to develop? It's a good question. We can't offer the answer, not very easily. Some of the nicest people are anti-Semites, and we wonder why. So Maurice Samuel tried to give an answer. How did it get started? Well, he told a story. Now, unfortunately, Maurice Samuel is not the best storyteller in the world. He's a wonderful publicist. He writes marvelous books of social and literary criticism. He is a person of great knowledge and ability to use the English language like few others. But he doesn't have the gift of the storyteller. And yet this is a good enough story if you're interested in, not in the story itself, if you're interested in what he tries to say and what he tries to tell you. And his answer is that anti-Semitism is not the fault of the real Christianity. It is the fault of the inability of those who understand the religion to cope with all the evils inherent in human nature. And no wonder Christianity makes such a fuss about original sin. They ought to. If anybody exemplifies the depth of sinfulness of which human beings can be capable, it is the Christians exemplifying it in their relations to the Jews in the course of the past 1900 years. Then too, there's another question to which we try to find an answer. We try to find an answer to the question of why it is that Jews through all these centuries did not offer physical protest against the oppression to which they had been subjected. Why didn't they get up and fight? Why didn't they take a sword in hand or a gun in hand and go out to battle? Now, the one who tried to answer that question is unfortunately not a very good craftsman. But he's a good storyteller. And so almost for every one that read Maurice Samuel's book, I think 100 must have read Uris Exodus, because he knows how to tell a story. His English is atrocious, his historical facts are distorted, but he knows how to tell a story. And what is more, he offers an answer. He offers an answer to this question which always bothers us. And the answer is a very simple one. We've never felt sufficiently united, and we never had a physical cause which promised glorious survival for our group in the future, as we have had when we started out to fight for the land of Israel. We felt weak, we didn't encourage one another, and if we won, what would have happened? We would still have had to face the same enemy. All kinds of things stood in the way. And all these things were removed when our people came to Israel, and no wonder they just took to the sword and to the gun, and were as good at it as anybody else. You can shrug your shoulders, as I sometimes do, or did, and wonder whether it's really worth it for Jews after all these years. Now, we're among ourselves, and I think we ought to, in our saner moments, we ought to confess this to ourselves, that while it is a great and glorious thing for the Jews to have won the War of Independence, the fact that Jews had to resort to killing, to war, in order to gain a measure of freedom, is in a sense a denial of all the ideals and all the history that has been ours for the past centuries. But we accept it because that's the milieu, that's the environment in which we find ourselves. And it offers, Uris's book offered an answer. It served as a test tube for our life as Jews. Now, I'm not talking about histories as such. Toynbee's history is a reflection, or offers an answer to questions that the general public, including ourselves, ask. What is the nature of human experience? And he offers his answer, just as Salo Baron offers the answer for the Jewish people. But that's history and not our subject today. Now, all these things, all these problems that bother modern man, are reflected in the literature, and every writer attempts to answer them. Every writer who is worth his salt, or worthy of the name. We are, however, faced with another problem. If this is the picture that our gifted people have of us, right or wrong, exaggerated or not, what can we do? What can we do? And I think this question bothers every intelligent Jew of the present day. We are aware of the difficulties. We are aware of the problems. We are aware that there are Levines among us, and that there are among us any number of people who might be classified among those whom Philip Roth described in Goodbye Columbus. What do we do? Do we resign and leave it to Israel to carry on the Jewish people and the Jewish cause? Or do we do something about it as a community, a vast, rich, secure, fairly secure, numerous, populous community such as we are, nothing like us ever in the past? Even Alexandria in Egypt, around the turn of the era, in the first century of the Christian era, even Alexandria, which was the largest diaspora and the wealthiest, and resembled us in any number of respects, even that community was not as big, not as secure, not as wealthy, and by and large, not as cultured as are the Jews of the present day here in this country. The question then that to which an answer must be sought is, what do we do about assuring our future, so that the writers of the next generation offer a better picture of us? And I submit, my friends, that we have to start from scratch. We have to start cultivating our people, molding their spirits, filling their minds with a certain type of attitude and a certain kind of knowledge, such as we have presumably or apparently failed to transmit to the generation now growing up or to the generation just grown up. That is why my primary interest in the last few years has been the Bible. We have to begin all over again. Now, understand. Ours is not a Bible religion. The modern Jew, to the contrary, notwithstanding. Judaism is not a Bible religion. Fundamentally, basically, it goes back to the Bible. It grew out of the Bible. But we are not a religion of the Bible. We have developed far beyond the Bible, if we only took ourselves seriously. And nothing can be such a distortion of Judaism as to make it a biblical faith. If you'll permit an illustration, a few weeks ago, in my hometown in Philadelphia, and now in New York, there is a play being produced by a Jewish author about a Bible character, Chayefsky, about Gideon. Now, it's a good play, and nothing I am going to say should discourage any of you from seeing it. It's amusing, it has a great deal of truth to it, and altogether quite successful. But my objection is to the assumption that this is the Jewish God, that Gideon, as he is portrayed, is the Jewish hero, and that the entire situation is anything but derived from a Christian attitude. In the first place, obviously, no Jew would tolerate, even on the boards of a theater, to have God appear as a human being. Maybe, it may well be that in Bible days that could have been tolerated. Because even then they didn't say God appeared. God spoke to various patriarchs and prophets. An angel appeared to various heroes and heroines of the Bible. For God to appear in the flesh, so to speak, and no matter how long the beard you give him, it's still a desecration of the name. And I maintain that if Chayefsky had been a Jew drawn out of a full-fledged Jewish environment, he couldn't permit himself to commit this kind of blasphemy. Then he not only does that, but the Bible tells the story that when certain enemies of the Hebrews were caught, they were captured in battle, Gideon slew them. Bad enough. And the rabbis subsequently had an enormous amount of trouble justifying this kind of action on the part of a hero of the Bible. But here God orders the slaying. God tells him, you go ahead and kill him. And when Gideon hesitates, it's God who insists. Now, true, the Bible says that God is a jealous God, and that he advised the slaughter of any number of peoples, presumably advised it. But it is again horrifying to see this kind of thing portrayed as though a Jew, a modern Jew, you or I, if God came up to us and said, now kill that person, as though we wouldn't say, what kind of God are you that you order slaughter? As to Gideon, he is almost a ninny. God not only has to tell him how to fight his battles, but he also has to tell him how many children to have. Now, no hero of the Bible can be portrayed in such lines. It just isn't Jewish. But quite apart from any